The fist connected with Cale's jaw like a sledgehammer, sending him sprawling into the dusty main street of Crimson Ridge. Blood trickled from his split lip as he staggered to his feet, his weathered hands still clutching the torn fabric of Liara's dress that he'd pulled from the grasp of Mayor Bristow's eldest son. "You made a mistake, Drifter," Caspian Bristow snarled, his knuckles already swelling from the impact. 3 of his cronies flanked him, their faces twisted with the cruel satisfaction of men who'd never faced real consequences. Nobody touches what belongs to the Bristow family. Cale spat blood into the dirt, his steel-gray eyes never leaving Caspian's face. The lady said no. That's all that matters. Lyra Whitmore stood frozen on the wooden sidewalk, her emerald dress torn at the shoulder where Caspian had grabbed. Her husband's funeral had been only 3 months ago, and already the vultures were circling. The mayor's son had cornered her outside the general store, his hands wandering where they had no business being, his whiskey breath hot against her neck as he'd whispered promises of protection in exchange for her gratitude. "Stay out of this, Liara," Caspian warned, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been denied anything. "This concerns men's business now." Cale was already moving, his calloused hands clenched into fists. He'd worked ranches from Montana to Mexico, had faced down rustlers and wild horses, but nothing had prepared him for the fire that ignited in his chest when he'd seen Lyra's terrified eyes. The second punch caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Then the third man joined in, and suddenly Cale was fighting for his life against impossible odds. His fists flew with desperate precision, connecting with jaw and gut, but for every blow he landed, 2 more found their mark on his body. "Please, stop." Leora's voice cracked like a whip through the afternoon air. "You're killing him." But the beating continued, methodical and vicious. Cale's vision blurred as boots connected with his ribs, his back, his head. Through the haze of pain he could hear Lyra sobbing, could feel her small hands trying to pull the men away from him. "That's enough." The voice belonged to Sheriff Mortimer, but even he seemed reluctant to fully intervene. "You've made your point, Caspian." Caspian straightened his vest, his breathing barely labored despite the violence. "The point, Sheriff, is that hired hands need to remember their place. This one forgot that Mrs. Whitmore is under my family's protection now." Cale struggled to his knees, his body screaming in protest. Blood dripped from his nose onto the dusty street, but his eyes remained defiant. "She doesn't need your kind of protection. We'll see about that," Caspian said, his voice dripping with menace. "Boys, I think our friend here needs to understand the consequences of interfering with Bristow business."
Yes.
The beating resumed with renewed fury, and this time, even Lyra's pleas couldn't stop it. As darkness crept into the edges of Cale's vision, he saw her face through the crowd that had gathered, beautiful, desperate, and filled with a gratitude that made every blow worth enduring. Cale woke to the gentle touch of cool water against his swollen face. The world swam back into focus slowly, revealing the modest interior of Lyra's cabin on the outskirts of town. Lamplight flickered across weathered wood walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mirror the pain radiating through his battered body. "You shouldn't have brought me here," he whispered, his voice barely more than a rasp. "It'll only make things worse for you." Leora's hands stilled on the cloth she'd been using to clean his wounds. Her auburn hair had escaped its pins during the struggle, framing her face in wild curls that caught the lamplight. "Where else would I take you? Doc Henley refuses to treat anyone who crosses the Bristows, and Sheriff Mortimer made it clear he wouldn't be providing any protection." She resumed her careful ministrations, her touch so gentle it was almost painful after the violence he'd endured. Cale studied her face in the flickering light, noting the determined set of her jaw, the way her green eyes blazed with an inner fire that matched his own. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk everything for a stranger?" Leora's hands paused again, this time resting against his chest where his shirt had been torn away. "Because in 3 months, you're the first person who's stood up for me. The first person who's treated me like something more than property to be claimed." A good man, she told him as she worked, but weak. When he'd died of fever, she'd expected the protection of the community. Instead, she'd found herself at the mercy of men who saw her as nothing more than a prize to be won. The ranch is small, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Just enough land for a few head of cattle and a garden. But it's mine, and I won't let them take it from me. Cale tried to sit up, wincing as his ribs protested. They'll be back. Men like Caspian Bristow don't forget when someone defies them. Then I'll be ready for them? Lyra's voice carried a steel that surprised him. She moved to a wooden chest in the corner, returning with a rifle that gleamed with careful maintenance. My father taught me to shoot before I could properly read. I may be alone, but I'm not defenseless. The sound outside made them both freeze. Hoofbeats on the dirt road, approaching fast. Cale forced himself to his feet, swaying slightly as his vision blurred. Through the window, he could see torches in the distance, growing brighter as they approached. They're coming, he said, his voice grim. At least 6 men, maybe more. Lyra checked the rifle's chamber, her movements swift and sure. Then we'll face them together. The irony wasn't lost on Cale. He drifted into Crimson Ridge looking for work, nothing more. A few days of ranch labor to earn enough money to move on to the next town, the next temporary job. He'd never intended to stay, never intended to care about anyone or anything in this dusty nowhere town. But then he'd seen Lyra in the general store. He'd watched the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the whispered comments of the other women. He'd seen the loneliness in her eyes, the way she flinched when men looked at her with hunger instead of respect. You could still leave, she said, as if reading his thoughts. Slip out the back while they're focused on the front door. No one would blame you. Cale met her gaze, seeing his own determination reflected in her emerald eyes. I'm not going anywhere. The hoofbeats grew louder, and soon they could hear Caspian's voice calling out through the darkness. Lyra, send out the drifter, and we'll discuss your situation like civilized people. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel. Toward the approaching riders. I think we've had enough civilized discussion for one day. The riders formed a semicircle around the small cabin, their torches casting hellish shadows across the prairie grass. Caspian sat his horse in the center, his face a mask of cold fury in the flickering light. Beside him, his father, Mayor Bristow, looked grim but determined, his political instincts warring with his paternal loyalty. This is your last chance, Lyra, Caspian called out. Send out the drifter and we can settle this without anyone else getting hurt. Lyra's answer came in the form of a rifle shot that splintered the fence post inches from Caspian's horse. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. While the other men scrambled for cover behind water troughs and outbuildings. I guess that's a no, Cale said, checking the loads in his own pistol. The weapon had been a gift from his father, before the old man had died working another man's cattle. It was one of the few things he'd kept through years of drifting. Mrs. Whitmore, Mayor Bristow's voice carried the authority of his office, but also a note of genuine concern. You're making a terrible mistake. My son has honorable intentions toward you. Marriage would solve all your problems. Marriage to a man who thinks women are property. Lyra's voice rang out clear and strong. I'd rather die a widow than live. As a slave, the siege began in earnest then. The men spread out, using the darkness and their superior numbers to their advantage. Shots rang out from multiple directions, forcing Cale and Lyra to duck and weave between windows as they tried to return fire. We can't hold out forever, Cale said during a brief lull. They'll wear us down eventually. But Lyra's face was set with grim determination, and we'll make them pay for every inch. As if summoned by her words, a new sound drifted across the prairie, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. But these weren't reinforcements for the Bristows. This were the ranch hands from the Whitmore spread, led by Joaquin Valdez, the foreman who'd worked for Leora's late husband. Senora Whitmore, Joaquin's voice carried across the night. We heard the shooting. The tide of the battle shifted in an instant. Caught between two forces, Caspian's men found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. What had started as a simple intimidation tactic had escalated into something far more dangerous. This isn't over, Caspian snarled as he wheeled his horse around. You can't hide behind hired help forever, Lyra. Sooner or later, you'll have to face reality. The reality is that you're a coward who preys on widows. Cale stepped out of the cabin, his pistol trained on Caspian's chest. Despite his injuries, his hand was steady. The reality is that you're not half the man you think you are. For a moment, it seemed like Caspian might go for his gun. The tension stretched taut between them, two men who represented everything the other despised. But Mayor Bristow put a restraining hand on his son's arm. "Believe," the mayor said. "But this matter isn't settled. Mrs. Whitmore would do well to remember that my family has considerable influence in this town." As the riders disappeared into the darkness, Leora sagged against the doorframe. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the fight was fading, leaving her shaken and exhausted. "Thank you," she said to Joaquin and the other ranch hands. "All of you." The foreman tipped his hat respectfully. "Senator Whitmore was a good man. We won't let anyone harm his widow." But as the men dispersed back to their own homes, Cale remained. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the lamplight, uncertain whether he was welcome to stay or expected to leave. "You're hurt," Lyra said, noticing fresh blood seeping through his shirt. "Come inside. Let me tend to your wounds." And for the first time since he'd arrived in Crimson Ridge, Cale felt like he might have found something worth staying for. Dawn broke gray and cold over Crimson Ridge. Painting the horizon in shades of amber and rose, Cale woke to find Lyra already dressed and moving quietly around the cabin, preparing coffee and checking the windows for any sign of trouble. She'd given him her bed while she spent the night in the chair by the door, rifle across her lap. "You should have woken me," he said, wincing as he sat up. "You need rest more than I do. I couldn't sleep anyway." She poured coffee into a tin, cup her hands steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "I kept thinking about what happens next. Caspian won't give up easily." The sound of approaching horses made them both tense, but this time it was different. A single rider, moving slowly and openly up the path. Through the window, they could see Doc Henley's familiar black bag bouncing against his saddle. "Didn't expect to see you here, Doc," Cale said as the older man dismounted. "Thought you didn't treat people who crossed the Bristows?" "Out, Doc." Henley's weathered face flushed slightly. "I don't like being told who I can and can't treat. Besides, I took an oath." He glanced at Lyra. "Mrs. Whitmore, I heard there was trouble last night. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, but Mr. Cale needs attention." She gestured to the makeshift bandages she'd applied to his wounds. "I did what I could, but you're not a doctor," Henley finished with a slight smile. "Let me have a look." As the doctor examined his injuries, Cale studied Leora's face. The morning light revealed the toll the night had taken on her, the dark circles under her eyes. The way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, it also revealed something else. A strength that went deeper than mere stubbornness. "Got a couple of cracked ribs," Doc Henley announced. "And that cut on your scalp needed stitching. But you'll live." He packed his instruments away with practiced efficiency. "Though I'd recommend staying out of fights with groups of men half your age." "I'll try to remember that," Cale said dryly. After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the cabin. Both of them knew that the events of the previous night had changed everything, but neither was sure how to address it. "I need to check on the cattle," Lyra finally said. "Make sure none of them wandered off during the excitement." "I'll come. With you, you need to rest. I need to be useful." Cale stood, testing his balance. "Besides, you shouldn't be alone out there." They walked together through the morning mist, checking the small herd that grazed on the valley floor. The cattle seemed undisturbed by the previous night's violence. It's concerned only with finding the best grass and staying close to the water source. "My husband bought this land with dreams of building something grand," Lyra said as they walked. 1,000 head of cattle, hired hands, maybe even a house in town for the winters. She gestured at the modest herd. "This is all we managed before the fever took him." "It's good land," Cale observed. "Good water, good grass. With the right management, it could support a much larger operation." "I know." Her voice carried a note of frustration. "I know what needs to be done. But I can't do it alone, and I can't afford to hire the help I need." They reached the creek that ran through the center of the property, its waters clear and cold from the mountain snowmelt. Lyra knelt to splash water on her face, and Cale found himself studying the graceful curve of her neck, the way the morning light caught the copper highlights in her hair. "I could stay," he said quietly, "help you build something here." She looked up at him, water droplets still clinging to her eyelashes. You're a drifter, Kale. You've said so yourself. Men like you don't stay in places like this. Maybe I'm tired of drifting. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Hope, perhaps, or longing. But then she stood and brushed off her skirts, the practical woman reasserting herself. The Bristows won't let this go, she said. They'll find other ways to pressure me. Legal ways, probably. Ways that don't involve gunfights in the middle. Of the night, then we'll face them together. She turned to face him fully. Kale, I appreciate what you did for me, more than you know. But I won't let you sacrifice your freedom for my problems. But even as she spoke the words, Kale could see the yearning in her eyes. The loneliness that had driven her to treat his wounds, to fight beside him through the night. She wanted him to stay just as much as he wanted to remain. What if it's not a sacrifice? He asked. What if it's exactly what I've been looking for? The town of Crimson Ridge buzzed with whispered conversations and sideways glances as news of the standoff spread. In the general store, at the saloon outside the church after Sunday service, people gathered in small groups to discuss the unprecedented events. A drifter had stood up to the Bristow, his family, and lived to tell about it, but the victory felt hollow to Kahlo as he made his way through the town square 3 days later. He'd come to purchase supplies for the ranch, but every merchant he approached suddenly found reasons to be closed or out of stock. The Bristows' influence ran deep, and their message was clear. Anyone who supported Lyra Whitmore and her hired hand would pay the price. Looking for something in particular? The voice belonged to Tabitha Crane, the schoolteacher who'd lived in Crimson Ridge for nearly 20 years. She was one of the few people who'd nodded respectfully to Kale on the street. Just supplies, Kale said. But it seems like everyone's suddenly run out of everything I need. Tabitha's laugh was bitter. The Bristows have made it clear that helping you would be bad for business. Most people here are too scared to stand up to them, but not you. I've seen what happens when good people do nothing, she said. My brother stood up to corrupt officials in Kansas City. It cost him everything, but it was the right thing to do. She led him to a small store on the edge of town. It's owned by an elderly German immigrant named Heinrich Weber. The old man looked nervous as they entered, but he gathered the supplies Kale needed without question. What you did was right, Heinrich said, as he tallied the purchases. That woman, she deserves better than what that pig Caspian offers. Meanwhile, at the Bristow mansion on the hill overlooking the town, Mayor Bristow paced his study while his son nursed a glass of whiskey. The events of the past few days had shaken the foundation of their carefully constructed power structure. You let a drifter embarrass us, the mayor said, his voice cold with anger. Do you have any idea what this means for our reputation? It means we need to be more direct, Caspian replied. No more playing games. If we want the Whitmore property, we take it. And how do you propose we do that? The woman has allies now. That foreman of hers, the doctor, even some of the townspeople, are starting to question our methods. Caspian's smile was cruel. Leave that to me. I've been thinking about this problem, and I believe I have a solution. The next morning, Sheriff Mortimer arrived at the Whitmore ranch with a folded document in his hand. His expression was apologetic, but determined as he handed it to Lyra. What is this? She asked, though she already suspected. Tax assessment, Mortimer said. Seems the county has reassessed your property value. Back taxes come to $800. $800. Lyra's voice was sharp with disbelief. Last year's assessment was $40. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. But if the taxes aren't paid within 30 days, the county will be forced to auction the property. The sheriff's voice was genuinely regretful. I didn't want to be the one to serve this, but you follow orders, Kale finished, even when you know they're wrong. Mortimer's face flushed. I have a job to do. My personal feelings don't enter into it. After the sheriff left, Lyra sank into a chair. The document crumpled in her hands. $800, she whispered. I don't have anywhere near that kind of money. There has to be a way, Kale said. Could sell the cattle, take out a loan. The cattle are worth maybe $200, and no bank in the territory would loan money to a widow with questionable property rights. Lyra's voice was hollow. With defeat, they've found their legal way to take everything. But Kale was already moving, checking his few possessions with desperate efficiency. At the bottom of his saddlebags, wrapped in oilcloth, he found what he was looking for, a leather pouch that represented 15 years of careful saving. $640, he said, pouring the coins and bills onto the table. It's not enough, but it's a start. Lyra stared at the money in shock. Cale, I can't take this. This is your life savings. What good is money if you don't? Spend it on something that matters? He covered her hands with his own. You matter, Lyra. This place matters. We'll find the rest somehow. For the first time since he'd known her, Leora Whitmore began to cry. Not the desperate tears of fear or frustration, but the overwhelming emotions of someone who'd been alone for so long that kindness felt like a miracle. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for me? Cale's answer was simple, and it came from the deepest part of his heart. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Lyra's tears stopped as she looked into Cale's eyes, searching for any sign of deception or mere sympathy. What she found there was something she'd never seen. Before a love that asked for nothing in return, that offered everything without conditions. You love me? She whispered. I've loved you since the moment I saw you refuse to let fear break your spirit, Cale said. I've loved you through every stubborn argument, every moment of courage, every time you've shown me what real strength looks like. But before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Through the window, they could see a dust cloud approaching too many riders to be friendly visitors. They're coming to see if we got the message, Cale said, grimly, reaching for his gun. Wait. Liara's hand stopped him. If we fight them now, we'll only prove their point. Let me handle this. Caspian Bristow rode at the head of a dozen men, his face smug with anticipated victory. He dismounted slowly, making a show of adjusting his gun belt before approaching the cabin door. Mrs. Whitmore, he called out, I trust you've had time to consider your situation. Perhaps now you'll be more receptive to my proposal. Lyra stepped out onto the porch, her chin raised defiantly. I have considered it, and my answer remains the same. Even knowing that you'll lose everything, Caspian's voice carried mock concern. $800 is a considerable sum for a widow with limited resources. I'll find a way to pay it. How? By selling yourself to that drifter. Caspian's voice turned ugly. Do you really think he'll stay when things get difficult? Like him don't understand commitment. Men like him understand honor, Lyra shot back. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you. The insult hit its mark, and Caspian's face darkened. You're making a mistake, Leora. My offer of marriage is generous, considering your circumstances, but my patience has limits. Then I guess you'll have to learn to live with disappointment. Was then that Cale stepped out of the cabin, his presence changing the entire dynamic of the confrontation. He didn't say a word, just stood beside Leora with his hand resting casually on his gun, but I was hoping you'd be here, Caspian said, his voice dripping with malice. I have a proposition for you, Drifter. Leave town now and I'll make sure. The tax assessment is ... adjusted. Stay, and I'll make sure you regret it. I'm not going anywhere, Cale said quietly. Then you're a fool. Caspian remounted his horse. You have 27 days to come up with the money. After that, this property will be auctioned to the highest bidder, and I intend to be that bidder. As the riders disappeared back toward town, Lyra finally allowed herself to lean against Cale's solid presence. The weight of the day's events was crushing, but somehow his warmth made it bearable. I need to tell you something, she said, about what you said earlier. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She turned to face him fully. I've been alone for so long, I forgot what it felt like to have someone care about me. Not what I could give them, or what they could take from me, but just ... me. Leora, I love you too, she said, the words rushing out before she could lose. Her courage, loved you since you stood up to Caspian in the street. I've loved you through every moment of danger, every time you've put my safety before your own. The kiss that followed was soft and sweet, filled with all the words they couldn't say and all the promises they were afraid to make. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. We still need to find the rest of the money, Lyra said practically. We will, Cale assured her. Somehow. But even as he spoke the words, he wasn't sure how they would manage it. $160 might as well have been $1,000, for all the hope he had of raising it in less than a month. That night, as they lay together in the small cabin, Leora told him about her dreams for the ranch. Not the grand visions her husband had harbored, but something more modest and achievable. A place where they could raise children, build a life together, even help other people who found themselves in desperate circumstances. It's not much, she said. It's everything, Cale replied. The solution came from an unexpected source. 3 days after Caspian's ultimatum, Joaquin Valdez rode up to the cabin with news that would change everything. Senora, I have been thinking about your problem, the foreman said, his weathered face serious. The other men and I, we have been talking. We know about the taxes, and we know what the Bristows are trying to do. Joaquin, I appreciate your concern, but please let me finish. He held up a calloused hand. Your husband, he was good to us. Fair wages, decent treatment. When he died, we stayed because we respected his memory. But now, now we want to help his widow. From his saddlebags, Joaquin produced a small cloth bag. Men have been saving their wages. We don't need much, just food, shelter, and honest work. This is what we can contribute. Lyra opened the bag with trembling fingers. Inside were coins and crumpled bills, worn smooth by working hands. I can't take this. It's your savings. And what good are savings if we can't use them to help? Someone we care about? Joaquin's words echoed Cale's from days earlier. Count it, Senora. The money totaled $93, not enough to cover the remaining debt, but a significant step toward their goal. As word spread through the small community of ranch hands and their families, more contributions appeared. A few dollars. Here, a handful of coins there. Each donation representing a sacrifice from people who had little to spare. But the real breakthrough came when Heinrich Weber arrived at the cabin one evening with an unexpected proposal. I have been watching what happens in this town, the old German said, his accent thick with emotion. The Bristows, they remind me of men I knew in the old country. Men who used power to crush those who could not fight back. Heinrich, if you're offering money, I can't not money, he interrupted. Something better. A job. My store? It is successful, but I am old. I need someone to help with the books to manage the inventory. The work would pay $50 a month, and there is a small apartment above the store. Leora's eyes filled with tears. You're offering me work? I am offering you independence, Heinrich corrected, and a chance to earn the money you need while keeping your dignity intact. With the job secured and the contributions from the ranch hands, they were still short by $27. But as the deadline approached, more unexpected allies emerged from the shadows. Tabitha Crane organized a collection among the women of the town, raising $18 despite the risk of Bristow retaliation. Doc Henley contributed his medical services in exchange for a promise of future payment. Even Sheriff Mortimer, in a moment of conscience, quietly suggested that the tax assessment might be reconsidered if a certain amount of pressure were applied to the county clerk. On the morning of the 28th day, Leora and Cale walked hand in hand into the county courthouse. Behind them came a procession of supporters' ranch hands, townspeople, and anyone else who had decided that courage was more important than convenience. The county clerk, nervous man named Pemberton, counted the money 3 times before declaring, "It's sufficient. $800. Exactly," he announced. "The taxes are paid in full." Caspian Bristow stood in the corner of the room, his face purple with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from finished." "The war is over," Cale said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." And he was right. The events of the past month had awakened something in Crimson Ridge, a sense of community that had been dormant for years. People who had been isolated by fear and intimidation had found their voices. They were no longer willing to be silenced. 6 months later, Mayor Bristow lost his re-election bid to Joaquin Valdez, who ran on a platform of fair treatment and honest government. Caspian, facing multiple charges of assault and intimidation, fled town in the middle of the night, leaving behind only debts and bitter memories. Leora and Cale were married in a simple ceremony at the ranch. With half the town in attendance, Heinrich Weber gave the bride away, while Tabitha Crane played the organ that had been borrowed from the church. As they stood together in the fading light of the prairie sunset, exchanging vows that promised a lifetime of shared struggles and victories, Lyra whispered to her new husband, "Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like." "Thank you for showing me what real love looks like," Cale replied. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from a handful of cattle to a thriving operation that employed dozens of workers. But more importantly, it became a symbol of what was possible when people refused to be intimidated by those who mistook cruelty for strength. And in the years that followed, whenever travelers passed through Crimson Ridge and heard the story of the ranch hand who was beaten for protecting a widow, they learned that sometimes the greatest courage isn't shown in the fighting, but in the choosing to stand up when standing up matters most. The love story of Cale and Lyra became legend in those parts, a tale of two people who found in each other not just romance, but the strength to transform an entire community. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents' love had changed the world, one brave choice at a time. And in the quiet moments of their later years, when they sat together on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they knew that they had found something rare and precious, a love worth fighting for, and a life worth living together.